Everyone, thank you for joining me today. I'm with Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action, a shero to me and many other moms who just want a safe world for our kids. Shannon and I were just talking before the interview, and she's already got me crying, thinking about all the reasons we need to change our gun laws to protect our families and just have a safer, more common sense set of standards for gun ownership in this country and for our legislation. It's a huge reason that I'm running for state representative, because laws at the state level are really strongly affecting this our safety now. And I learned that because of Moms Demand Action. So I got involved as a volunteer, thinking maybe I'd attend an event or two. But when Moms Demand Action started having its advocacy days at the State House, and I went to one of them, I felt so powerful. I felt like we could actually maybe chip away at this problem. And for me, I've always been sort of a political junkie. I was a political science major in college. And unfortunately, I had already started to accept the cynical view that it was impossible to beat the NRA. And I even told other moms. It was another mom who told me about Moms Demand Action. And she would tell me, all we need to do is make people aware of these issues and the problems with our laws, and we'll be able to change it right away. And I started out by saying to her, I'm afraid it's impossible. I'm afraid the NRA has too much money and too much influence and too much power. But because she told me about Moms Demand Action, and I started following Moms Demand Action on Facebook, I saw that you were getting some wins in places where I wouldn't have expected you to get wins, down south.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, well, if they can get a win in that state with all these moms in red t-shirts going to talk to their state legislatures and ask for their consideration in making better, safer laws, then we can definitely do it in Ohio. And that's what motivated me to invest my time in this. Because if I didn't think that it was something we could win, I wouldn't have spent my time on it.
Yep.
As a mom, there are plenty of things we can spend time on. And so I learned about keeping an eye on state legislation through Moms Demand Action, who educated me on what are some of the laws here in Ohio that are being considered or already have been passed, and how do those affect our lives? And that brought to my attention what my own state representative's voting record is on these issues. It's not good. He is unapologetic about supporting some of the most extreme laws that can be passed at the state level. Our state is going in the direction of trying to pass laws that don't require permits or training for concealed carry weapons. Our state has considered stand your ground laws, which are extraordinarily dangerous for all of us, but particularly for people of color, we've seen. And it's just not, it doesn't represent really our state's values in Ohio. Shannon, take my word for it. Our laws are bad here, but I'm telling you, it's because of, unfortunately, an extremist legislature who are working on behalf of the gun lobby and not on behalf of real voters. I know that to be true in this district. So I am running in an area west of Cleveland, and we're a suburban district made up of 5 suburban cities. 2 of them are right on our gorgeous Lake Erie. And so we are concerned about, the issues that affect our families' everyday lives. And so with all of that said, I'm so thankful that you're taking time to sit and talk with me today about what we can do to make positive change in this district and in our state.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you. And, I don't know how much of this you're going to show, but the fact that you got so emotional, I think, about, protecting kids, I think it's so incredibly important. One thing that I hear so often, and I have certainly learned this, is that you assume lawmakers care. You assume that your lawmaker wants to hear from you and that they have your best interest at heart. And it's just not the case. about 80% of our lawmakers in this country are men. And as the saying goes, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And too often our children and women in this country, and particularly women of color, are on the menu. And so I'm just thrilled that volunteers like you are moving from not just shaping policy, but to actually making it, because it will make such a huge difference in our state houses and in Washington, D.C., when we are finally represented and our voices are heard, and we can take votes on this that will matter and change the trajectory of the country.
Well, having your support and your leadership and the visibility that you have brought to this issue and your courage in continuing to talk about it, no matter what anyone says to you online or in real life, is a huge part of why I feel like I can do this. So I appreciate it, Shannon. Do you want to tell everybody what made you start doing this and what the origins of Moms Demand Action are?
Moms Demand Action actually started in the Midwest. I was your neighbor in Indiana, and I was a mom. I still am, but at the time I was the mom of 5 of pretty young kids. And I had been watching, like everyone, horrific shooting tragedies in this country, one after the other, for decades, and had done nothing, assuming that eventually someone would do something. And then when the Sandy Hook shooting tragedy happened and I was watching the news, I kept seeing pundits and politicians come on the TV and say somehow the solution was more guns. And I didn't know anything about organizing or gun laws or gun violence, but I knew that was a lie. I knew that was wrong. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to join something like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which was so influential to me as a teen growing up in the 80s. And there was nothing that existed, at least for women and moms specifically, across the country, right? I wanted it to be this army of women because that's who often gets things done, right? All the way from suffrage up to the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. So I started a Facebook page thinking, honestly, it would be an online conversation. And it's turned into, because of volunteers like you, one of the largest grassroots movements in the country. And, we are a political powerhouse in state houses and in boardrooms, and soon in Washington, D.C. after this election is over.
That's right. I love the friendships that I've made through Moms Demand Action as well. It's making a difference, but also I get to connect with like-minded women who are also brave and outspoken and kind and compassionate, and it's just an amazing organization. I'm so glad.
And they happen to serve as a volunteer army when you decide to run for office.
That's right. That works out great. And my opponent better understand how scary that is, because
yes.
Moms Demand Action volunteers are dedicated and work really hard, and it makes a huge difference. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my opponent's his voting record and just some of the legislation that we have seen come to Ohio. He has I have some notes here to read. He supported a GOP-backed bill that would modify concealed carry laws to the point that it would potentially eliminate the requirement for a license. So we're talking about people carrying a gun on their body and not having to have even the same level of certification that someone needs to have to drive a car. Not even a basic license for that. And the bill also eliminates penalties for failure to notify, which leads to confusion and potentially dangerous escalation of situations where a gun is involved. And so we've also had Stand Your Ground repeatedly come up in Ohio. Stand Your Ground is legislation that people need to know really affected the outcome of the Trayvon Martin case in Florida. It made it very hard to prosecute the person who murdered Trayvon because Stand Your Ground legislation essentially is kill at will legislation. It lets people shoot to kill whenever they say they feel afraid, and that's extremely dangerous. So I would love to hear a little bit about, and they're also talking about decriminalizing of any violations of carrying your concealed weapon into a place that tells you they don't want your concealed weapon. So just making a guns everywhere kind of environment, which helps gun manufacturers to sell more guns. And we know that this does not increase safety in the community. So the myth around a good guy with a gun really is truly a myth. And so, I'd love to hear, Shannon, I'd love to hear you talk about what does work, because I believe that this kind of legislation doesn't work. And unfortunately, my opponent is unapologetic about supporting all of it. So what does work, and why don't these things work?
Yeah, well, those are laws that behoove the gun lobby, right? Those are laws that enrich gun manufacturers. And that's why we have nearly 400 million guns in circulation in this country, because the gun lobby has convinced lawmakers to do their bidding for decades, both in DC and in state houses. We know that states with stronger gun laws have fewer gun deaths. It's pretty intuitive, but because of the NRA's misinformation and rhetoric, not everyone understands that simple things like a background check on every gun sale, which we don't have in this country. Some states have it. 22 states now require a background check on every gun sale, but it is not federal law. So if you're buying a gun from a private dealer, they don't have to perform a background check in too many states. And it's how we get guns into the hands of dangerous people all too often. People also don't necessarily understand that it's easy for domestic abusers to get guns in this country. Stalkers and dating partners are not prohibited purchasers under federal law. And so that's why we've gone state by state, now 28 states, to pass stronger gun laws, but we need that also at a federal level. Red flag laws have been shown to be very effective in deterring mass shootings, acts of domestic gun violence, and now 18 states have those laws. So we're going state by state to pass what seem like common sense laws, but we shouldn't have to fight for them. And the reason that we do is because there's still some lawmakers in state houses and in DC that are beholden to the gun lobby, right? And we've loosened their grip. I always say this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's going to take several election cycles to get to where we need to be. But we're getting closer, and it's important that Republicans and Democrats alike understand that this is what the vast majority of Americans, of gun owners, even NRA members support. And I think that we are getting so close to finally being at that point. And again, with people like you running for office and getting elected, that will change the equation even more quickly.
You mentioned the idea that even convicted domestic abusers are able to easily get weapons. And, one piece of my family story is that when I was a young child, while my mother was still married to my father, she faced domestic violence and escaped that. Now, as an adult, through Moms Demand Action, having learned that the presence of a gun in a home in a domestic violence situation exponentially increases the possibility that there will be a fatality in that situation, it really stopped me in my tracks when I learned that, because I thought, I'm thankful that I'm safe and my mother's safe today and that we did escape a bad situation, but to think that it could have gotten so much worse so quickly had there been a gun present in the situation is really frightening. And recently, in the midst of the pandemic, we've seen a spike in gun sales, and that means that there are more guns in homes. There may be more guns in homes where the gun owner doesn't have any training or experience using the weapon. There can be more risk of accidents to children, and if there is domestic violence, as we experience so much stress, and we know that domestic violence reports have been reported more frequently during the pandemic, it just sounds like an extremely frightening situation. And I would just love to hear you talk about, in the midst of the pandemic, some of those factors.
Yeah, so we know there was a historic number of gun sales every month from March through July so far. And that's because the gun lobby stokes fear and chaos and exploits tragedy like the coronavirus crisis in order to juice gun sales. This is their specialty. They've been doing it all the way back to Hurricane Katrina. So the fact that we have an increase in gun sales combined with the fact that so many people are isolated at home, that means women are isolated with domestic abusers. We have seen about a 20% increase in calls to domestic violence hotlines, and we're quite certain we will see the data unfortunately show increased incidences of domestic gun violence in this country during the pandemic. And so that's why we are advocating that governors give more time for background checks to be completed. Right now, the law is 3 days, and then you can sell a gun without a background check. Governor Gina Raimondo, for example, in Rhode Island, has extended that window. We have also argued for and pressured for more dollars to go to these hotlines as part of the stimulus funding. And we need to educate people about responsible gun storage, and we do that through our Be Smart campaign. Now, over 1 million children have had information from Be Smart sent to their homes, but it's important that people understand that guns should be stored in their homes, locked, unloaded, and separate from ammunition.
The Be Smart training is something that I really appreciate because I feel like it does acknowledge, the point of view that many people do want to have a gun in the home and it makes them feel safe. But if they're going to have it and they feel that that's their Second Amendment right, Moms Demand Action is at least part of that conversation to say, okay, if that's your decision, then we would like you to be informed on how to keep your family as safe as possible with that gun in the home. And so I just really I think that that's a perfect example of a common sense position to take. We acknowledge that there will be guns in homes, and so let's make it as safe as we can. So I love that piece of the whole mission of Moms Demand Action. It's not just about we're going to try to reduce the number of guns that are out there because we know that makes people safer. We know that reduces instances of gun violence and accidents, but we'll also work with families to understand how to keep kids safe. And so one of those important pieces that I want to share with everyone before we go today is to consider asking when your children go to another person's house, consider asking, just like you might ask if they have dogs or other things to be aware of, or if your child has a food allergy, you might have a conversation about what foods your child can't eat. It is helpful for all of us to practice asking each other, do you have any guns in the home, and how are they stored? I have to admit, I have rarely been brave enough to ask this question, but I've heard lots of success stories about people who do, and how it works right into other safety questions that you might ask. And I know that Be Smart encourages us to ask those questions so that we know what kind of environment our kids are in. And so,
yeah, super important question.
Yeah, I wouldn't have known about it if it weren't for Moms Demand Action. So I guess in closing, I know that I only have a short amount of time with you. I'm so thankful for the time that you did give us today. I just want to thank Everytown for Gun Safety for its endorsement of my race, and Moms Demand Action for its support of my race. I couldn't be prouder. It's the endorsements that I've received. It was one that really stopped me in my tracks and made me just incredibly proud because I deeply believe in what you do and the potential that we have to make our communities safer by just having some common sense gun legislation. The last example I'll give is that, my father-in-law, he passed away about a year ago, and before he passed away, we would sometimes speak about guns in the news and shootings. And my father-in-law grew up in West Virginia, grew up hunting and shooting, and I was really struck one time when he said, "Well, I don't understand why we just don't have universal background checks." And I thought, okay, my father-in-law used to be a card-carrying member of the NRA. This tells me that the NRA isn't representing its own members. It's not representing even the sentiments of gun owners who do want a safer world. And so I know that if we work toward common sense gun legislation, like requiring background checks to make sure that responsible people are the ones who are buying guns, that we can make our communities much safer. So, Shannon, is there anything else that you would like to share before we go?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, we support the Second Amendment. Many of our volunteers are gun owners or their partners are gun owners. This is simply about restoring the responsibilities that go along with gun rights, and stop allowing gun lobbyists to write our nation's gun laws. And the way we do that is by electing people who care and electing people who really just reflect the majority of American sentiment, which is that we need stronger gun laws. And so I look forward to celebrating with you in November, and I'm so grateful for your courage and that you are stepping into the arena and running for office.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you for everything you do, and I'll be cheering for you as well every step of the way.
Thank
Keep
you.
going.
You too.
Thanks.